Welcome back, everyone. The beauty of drawing digitally in Photoshop or Procreate or one of these programs is that you can really experiment with your composition before you get started. And you can see what I'm doing here with this hydra drawing that I'm starting. Now this is a pretty complicated subject matter because there's going to be lots of noodles with horrible scaly faces attached to the end of them. And they need to arrange in a pleasant, energetic, and pleasing composition. And it's really difficult to get that right the first time. So if you're doing something like this and you're working in your sketchbook to come up with a composition, it could actually be kind of frustrating trying again and again and again to get it right. I should know. I just tried it. And I did a few and realized that trying to get all of the different tubes to sort of wrap around one another correctly in a sketch is kind of difficult if you can't modify that sketch easily, and I ended up relying on my eraser and making a messy, ugly page in my sketchbook. So I thought, why not jump straight into Photoshop and use its strengths? You know, as a drawing platform, it's fantastic at iteration. You can draw a sketch like this and then lower the opacity of that layer and draw another cleaner, nicer sketch on top. And you can modify, cut it up, throw it around, really like collage it into a nice, pleasing composition before you get started. And it's a very low stress way to start an image. So I figured for such a complicated subject matter like this, that was going to be my approach. Now, while I'm on the subject of playing into the strengths of mediums and methods, this also applies to your workflow. And for an image like this, which is, as I've said it a couple of times, very complicated, there is a lot going on, many areas that need to be refined and focused on, I need to have a more organized workflow. Now, I've spoken on this channel quite a bit about not wanting to have too many barriers in between my stylus or brush or pencil and the resulting image. I want to have an immediacy to what I'm doing, and I want to spend as little time messing around trying to find layers or fighting different layer modes and things like that as possible. I want it to feel like I am making an image, not organizing a database. But those direct methods are not how I have always worked, and they can be really intimidating if you're starting out. In fact, when I started out, I had a far more organized workflow, and especially when I was doing client work, I didn't want to take any chances. And if you're just putting colors down onto an image and you get them wrong, you may have very few options to backtrack out of your mistakes and try and rectify the image. So I'm going to describe to you today the workflow that I developed when I was working professionally as an illustrator, so that I could be more organized and have the ability to kind of pivot my direction and be able to make modifications for clients, have a lot more flexibility because revisions are going to be part of your life if you do this professionally. And if you do not have an organized workflow, layers broken out in manageable ways, you could be in for a bit of a difficult time, let's put it that way. If you need to make revisions, you could spend an additional week on an image that you only budgeted for a single week, for example. And guess how much your landlord cares that you made 50% of your income that week? Not very much. So the first step is to make a sketch that you are happy with. And you're going to do a very loose sketch at first, like I just finished. Use your lasso tool to cut the whole thing up and arrange things. Be messy, just try and get energetic lines. Try and get that gesture of the image. It's very important that there be life underneath. And once you have that lively, gestural, loose sketch, lower the opacity and then go in with another layer on top and do a more refined line art on top. And that's what I'm doing here. Now this takes quite a long time, but if you are working on client work and you want to make sure that you have something that's rock solid a foundation to work from that you know isn't going to fail. A strong finished line art like this is a perfect foundation, because when you go in there with this little brush and start trying to solve all of these little problems, you will encounter all of the problems that you're going to hit. You're going to have to resolve these different forms and how they work their way into one another. There's no cheating with a line art like this. So when you go in with your paint and color and everything to finish the image, you know you have a rock solid foundation to build on and that you've already solved all your problems. It's just a matter of executing and rendering from that point. And another, probably even more important point to creating a line art like this is that it is fully resolved. And if you show this to a client, they know exactly what they're looking at. Whereas if you were to do something which is more like how I usually start images, but a very loose sketch, and then throwing down a bunch of value and color and kind of sculpting the image out of chaos, you can't really show a client a messy, unresolved mess. They're not going to understand what they're looking at. The image is only in your mind, and there's just some abstract garbage on the screen that needs to be resolved. You just can't show it to people. They don't know what to expect, and they won't be able to commit. But if you show them a resolved line art like this, they'll understand everything about it, and they should be able to give you comments that you can incorporate early on and save yourself a hell of a lot of time down the track. So even though this line art did take me between 5 and 7 hours to complete, it's an investment. That time is an investment in certainty. And I'm certain, because I've solved all of the problems, that this image is going to be at least reasonably successful. Now, with the line art done, I've decided to show my layer structure on the right-hand side, which I don't usually do. So I'm going to show you how I arrange my layers so that it's nice and organized and easy to understand. Anybody, if I'm working on a team with other concept artists or something like that, they could open up my file and within 2 minutes they could figure out where everything is and what it's doing. It's a good way to work, it's a good workflow, it's good practice if you want to work professionally. So what I'm doing here is making a mask around the hydra, and I'll do this for every element within my scene, all of the major parts. And by mask I mean a layer that is a single color that is the exact shape of whatever element exists in your scene. So Hercules here, the hydra, the trees, the rocks, the ground, they are all a mask. And if you make another layer above that mask, then hold the Alt button and click the line between the two, you will attach your new layer to that mask. And you will no longer, on that attached layer, be able to draw outside of the extent of the mask. It is extremely useful for keeping everything organized. Now, once I have created a mask for each of these major elements within my image, I will color code those layers, and I'll show you how I do that here. So you right click and then just go down to here, and there is a list of colors. So each major element within my image gets a different color. Then I will create a group, and everything that is a part of the hydra goes there. Now, the first layer is the mask. It is the basic green color of the hydra, but every other part of the hydra, which is distinct from that green scale color, gets its own layer and is attached to the mask. So I cannot draw outside the extent of the mask. So I've got the underside of the belly, the mouth, the horns, and then I have more layers above in which I am adding the local color for various patterns and hue variation within the skin tones of the hydra. Now, it's important at this early stage not to think about the lighting at all. You'll notice that all of the colors that I have used so far are basically in the middle value range, middle saturation. They are the local color. There is no lighting information in the scene at this time. We're going to add that later in a really organized way that allows for whatever kind of iteration you will need. And we're going to get that versatility by using layer masks. So the first step is to select a color for your shadows. This is a bit of a dark and gloomy forest, so I am going to make a dark grayish blue layer above my hydra. Then I'm going to attach it to the group so that it only draws that color within the extent of the hydra. And then I set that color to a multiply layer. Now this is just going to add some of that color into the existing local color that we just put down for the hydra. And then I will show you what I did before to make it a layer mask. There's a little button just down here at the bottom of the layer structure. And if you have a layer selected and you click this button, it will create a white panel to the side of your layer right here. And this is your layer mask. So anything that is white is going to let that color come through, and anything that is black is going to block that color from coming through. So all that I have to do is go in and paint the light into the hydra. And this is a very versatile way to work because you can simply hit the X key and it will swap your brush color from black to white. So you can paint in the light, then X, and remove some of that light. This allows you to really carve out those forms and render in a very stress-free way because you don't have to worry about all of those hue variations and color changes. You just have to paint in the light, and the layer mask will handle all of the rest for you. And you can make more layer masks. You don't just have to have a shadow pass, you can make a highlight pass. So make another layer on top, which is a brighter, warmer color, for example, and set that layer to soft light perhaps. Another good thing to do is to add a reflected light layer, so some sort of ambient light coming from the back. I've got one here that's like a lighter blue. And you can basically just paint in all of the various elements of a rendered form. The direct light, the core shadow, the reflected light, all of these different elements will have a different layer mask, and you can just add and subtract them as needed, which means that if you do have to modify the drawing because the client requested a revision, for example, to move ahead, you can simply move that head and then just rework these layers to get them rendered correctly instead of having to redraw the whole thing. I also like to add some of these layer masks at the very top of my layer structure so that I can kind of modify all of the colors in unison. Because when you start by creating a bunch of various layer masks with local colors that you've selected from the color picker that kind of represent what you want to draw, they may not work 100% together. They may not relate to one another closely enough. So a good thing to do is to apply a layer over the entire scene, set to like a multiply or soft light, depending on whether you want it to be lighter or darker, and then just set the opacity very low. That way it's going to add some of that color to the whole scene and just sort of move all of the colors closer to one another so that they feel more harmonious. And that's pretty much it for this one. This image is far from finished, but you can get the idea of where the image will end up if I were to take it to a final render. And if I was to show this to a client, they know exactly what they're going to get. So this is the final image here. And then this is what it looks like if I remove the line work. You see, the values are kind of there, the colors are kind of there, the forms are reading, but there's almost no detail there. To finish this image is a lot of work, but you know exactly where it's going to go because you have this line art on top that you can paint over and just slowly add information right up until that arbitrary moment where you say, it's done, and hit the send button. Anyway, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I hope you found this one useful and informative, going a bit deeper into the process. If you like these kinds of videos, please let me know in the comments down below. And until the next video, guys, I'll see you later.